Okay, we're on.
Good afternoon. Welcome everyone to a new CRID webinar. Today we have another special guest that we are all looking forward to the talk that we will have for today. We have Cristiano Luchetti, who is an architect, a researcher, and an educator. As a practicing architect, he led the design of large-scale projects in residential, commercial, and hospitality sectors in Europe, China, India, and Middle East, and Southeast Asia. He's currently pursuing his PhD at the University Politecnica del Marche in Italy, and he's an adjunct professor of architecture at CRID University in Dubai's campus. As an associate editor of Compasses, he regularly writes about architecture and urban development for the Middle East. Cristiano co-curated the Egyptian pavilion at the 2018 Architecture Biennale. The pavilion gained international recognition and was shortlisted in the World Architecture Festival 2018 display projects category and won the honor award at the Cairo Design Award in 2018. I have personally went through Cristiano's website to read more about the guest, and I have seen way more than the things that I just mentioned, way more. So that's a brief, because of the nature of the time, that's a very brief introduction about our guest today that we are all looking forward to for this talk. So Cristiano, that's all from my side for now, and I would like to remind everyone attending this webinar, if you have any questions for the guest, please feel free to ask your questions in the Q&A section, or you can send your questions privately to me in the chat, and I'll be directing all of these questions to Cristiano at the end of the talk. Cristiano, that would be all from my side for now, and I'm looking forward to the talk. The stage is yours.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And thank you so much for the introduction. Thanks for inviting me. I'm very happy to be back and to give this lecture about my own research, which focuses, as I was introduced to the architecture and urbanism in the Middle East. Today, I want to take you to a journey with me. I find myself in the position of being very curious about exploring urban contexts mainly, but since a while also something beyond, the places that might be considered different than what we perceive as the urban real. But actually, if we go a little bit deeper and we study the conditions and the epistemology of these areas, we see that they are somehow intimately related to the city, to the urban context. So I'm going to start sharing my screen. I share sound. Okay. Could you please confirm you can see my screen so I can just start?
Yes, we can see the screen, yes.
So let me go back. Okay, so this is my, so my presentation is titled Dubai's Peri-Urbanity, an investigation on the city's desert side. And that's where we're going to go for the next hour. And maybe a little bit beyond that, beyond the desert of Dubai, to see and compare certain characteristics. Now, this is going ahead by itself. So I want to stop. I don't know why it has a presentation by itself. Let me, okay. As I said, I've been studying a lot the metropolitan condition of Dubai. Sorry, but I need to stop this. Do you know how to do this? Because it's going by itself, and this is something we didn't test.
Probably just don't make it on its own. So maybe when you put full screen mode.
Yeah. So I put a full screen mode. Okay.
And then go back.
It moves. I mean, it's like a presentation. I don't know. This is the evil of every presentation, right? That comes in unexpectedly. I'll try
So
again.
now, okay.
Yeah. I'll try again. Let's see if it goes.
Maybe unshare and share it again one more time just to make sure. Yeah, because it is moving on its own.
Yeah, it's
alternatively, maybe don't make it full screen.
Yeah.
Then in this way, maybe it will work.
That will be the best. Sorry, just a moment.
No problem.
So here. Okay, I will just go like this. It's okay. I think it's visible enough, isn't it? Okay.
No,
so
now we can't see it. It's unshared.
Yes, because it's unshared. There. How about now?
Yeah.
You can see the
Yes.
first slide? Okay, let's go. Let's move on. So the Dubai is obviously a global urban phenomenon, and we've been studying, like myself and so many other scholars. I think some of them are even here today, and that I kind of feel that we have I'm not saying maybe a clear picture of what Dubai is about, but I think that the literature that is available and has been researched, and all the papers that we've been writing, all the kind of architecture that we try to produce responding to the specific urban condition of Dubai, created a sort of a as I said, a clear picture, something that makes us understand how Dubai became what it is now, where it's probably going, although as architects, we never get the future right. And we define certain characteristics of the city that we cannot find anywhere else. So there are something very specific. For instance, one of the most used is this terminology of Dubaization, this adjective, let's say, the process of urbanizing a city with futuristic and pioneering architecture, creating this urban context from nowhere. Once I define an archetype, something that didn't exist before, and it doesn't start for something that was coming historically. So it's a fertile ground for experiments in architecture. There is, we know the contrast between the different scales, between the different styles, the different languages. We know how the urban context works through enclaves, very well defined by the infrastructure that, if in one direction connects the city and the territory, in the other direction divides the city in areas that are very hard to put to communicate to each other. And then there is a level of the image of the city that is trying to portray, is to attract tourists, is to create some sort of a imaginary urban condition that will bring the notion of the urban context to the level of the spectacle, right? Something that is there to tell us that there is a dimension over what we perceive, and that's how Dubai most of the time communicate itself. There is also another important thing, is the relationship with the nature, with the landscape. Dubai really does manipulate the landscape more than many other places. The notion of what is artificial and what is natural in Dubai is very tricky. These are all things that I'm sure we share and we know. And then we get to the desert. The desert is, before was somehow the antagonist portion of the territory, antagonist to the city. Although Dubai desert is also specific because, usually the desert is empty. And as you can see here, the desert is not that empty. And it's used for some purposes that we might see in a moment. Because this is, I think, is the specific time of history where we want to understand what happens in the relationship between cities and what is not cities. So at this moment, we can look at the growth of populations in the city. And this specific time is very peculiar because there is a moment in 2012 where the people that live in the urban context in the cities became bigger. The amount of them became bigger than those that don't live in rural areas. And this goes back to the point of that makes Rem Koolhaas in his recent research and recent exhibition that opened at the beginning of the pandemic last year at the Guggenheim in New York. It started in 2014, but the exhibition opened last year. And it was about his article about the countryside. The countryside, as he called the future, he says that is now the front line of transformation. A world formerly dictated by the seasons and the organization of agriculture is now a toxic mix of genetic experiment, industrial nostalgia, seasonal immigration, territorial buying sprees, and so on. In other words, a more volatile than most accelerated city. So there is a new condition, right? Something that didn't exist before. The countryside, especially in Europe, was there to support cities, and it was at the service of city, mostly to produce food, and more than visiting landscapes. But now it started to getting its own identity. And as you can see here, this is one of the examples of Rem Koolhaas. This is a 750-acre city of cattle in Grandview, Idaho, allows thousands of cows to be bred under intense farming conditions. And you can see this looks like a 19th century city, right? So it's a highly organized, extremely efficient, something that might remind the way how we used to design cities in the Renaissance. For instance, the example of Palmanova is a great example of a city that was not able to expand, heavily regulated by its geometry, influenced by the needs of being fortified and defending itself, and so on, responded to certain functions, but again, heavily designed, and very controlled. Something that went throughout history also very recently. If we look at Barcelona and this specific grid of the Plan Cerdà, is that idea of controlling space and the expansion of the city is still there through the master plan. Then something happened, and we lost that power, like the logics that go beyond what we can control through an overall master plan of the expansion of the city, goes on a more of an organic kind of production of the space, of the urban space. So we lost control over the city, while the countryside is then it's becoming the new regulated city. So the countryside, as I said, is also importing very rapidly the new technologies. The digital world is not only on cities, but is moving there, and is controlling all the, as you can see from the tractor, the machine, the man disappear. Everything is now wireless and remotely controlled. The landscape is changing. The colors of the landscape, the materiality of landscape is changing because of the intense cultivations, agricultural production, and so on. The architecture is changing as well on that countryside. As you can see, new, very mysterious architecture is appearing without facades, without architectural language, extremely efficient, together outside, and the indoor spaces as well are changing, getting more and more specialized with the perception of spaces that we never saw before, completely new. Together with the space, also the society is changing. So at the beginning, if you look at the population, rural population in Italy or in Europe, for instance, the people were very different. So now, for instance, there are very famous Sikhs who make Italy's famous Grana Padano cheese. So the people is changing, the society, and the pictures that we could take just 50 years ago, they're very different than what we say today, what we can see today. So now moving on in this comparison, now I introduce this and say what this has to do with the desert of Dubai. I'm going to tell you now in a moment. So Rem Koolhaas does this experiment. He takes this 13 by 3 kilometers, 12 by 3 kilometers rectangle on a countryside in the Netherlands. And he's kind of analyzing the functions, right? And he sees that he allows this research to, what I said before, to say that now the countryside has its own identity. and it becomes an antagonist. People, especially now, imagine with the smart working and working from home and so on, they don't need to be in the city anymore. So they're moving there, and the countryside is starting to provide functions that they never provided before. So it's not only leisure, but there are like wedding venues, and you can see there are solar panel vendor or country western dancing, right? Sculpture garden, all functions that you might probably be used to find in the city. Now you can also find there, of course, on a different density. So my idea was why I don't take this kind of rectangle and I put it in the countryside of Dubai, which is in this case will be the desert side of Dubai. And if I do that operation without any kind of critical change and design, that's what happens. Nothing happens. That the rectangle would be most likely completely empty, right? So the main characteristics and the driving forces that are informing this kind of framing of the territory must change. And what we need to introduce, it's a different study, because we need to understand that obviously the density is different. So mainly the density is different, and that's why we will find an empty rectangle. So looking at the density here, you will see these are maps of the territory of Dubai that shows what are the denser area and what are the emptier. And you can see it goes between 35,000 people. That most those are the labor area, of course, where people live very next to each other, to some areas where it's at 0.09, right, people per square kilometers. And also they change, how this density changed throughout the years from 2010 to 2018. You can see that the same place, Gadir Barashi, went from 0.09 to 7, which is still 518% more. And you can see that kind of in this time, there is a little slow moving out from the city into the desert. And that just already tells something that we might incorporate in the research. The other thing is that who are these people? Who are the people that live in this territory? And the foreign citizenship diagram is also very important. You can see that sometime in the same place, Gadir Barashi, those 7 people are all foreign, right? 100%, and nobody local lived there. There is also a ratio between male and female. And strangely, in some areas in the desert, you can find that the ratio is almost equal between male and female. Let's remember that the UAE and Dubai is like 80% of the people are male, so around 80%. So there you can see it's more balanced, because the people that live there have lots of mates. So that's what makes the female population. So in order to find the new rectangle to study, we need to go a little bit more into the research of the territory. And the first thing to do is to understand that the system, the urban infrastructure, or let's say the territorial infrastructure of the emirate, started to have those axes connecting specific points. And the specific points are the sources of water. The last thing you want to do when you walk in the desert is go in no direction. You just want to go from one point where you can get water to the next one straight, right? This happens also when you navigate. When you're sailing, you want to go from the mainland to the other mainland without really wasting any time. So as you can see, the roads are actually connecting those points. So the main infrastructure, especially the perpendicular to the coast, while the other came later, and they didn't have this necessity. So from there, we can kind of understand one area and expand the rectangle and see that what is in that rectangle because of this condition, because of looking where kind of there is a little bit more density in the desert, in the area. So if we look at this rectangle that now become 32 kilometers wide, and the functions that are there, we easily can find out that basically most of the functions, except the people that used to live there, the locals, are there to support Dubai as a city. So you will see that there are resorts, there is a cycle track, the stables for the camel track that of course is used by the people that live in Dubai. There is a wedding hall, the heritage village was already there, but somehow this ensemble of functions are there to tell that these functions are being placed there, and they are there to support the main activities of the city, which in this case will be probably tourism. You know, see motorsports, more resorts, and so on, desert tourism, and so on. So if we start looking at specific case, we can get a few case studies. And one of the examples that I've been looking at is, for instance, Margam. Margam is the farmland settlement, as we call it, because originally there are some areas where next to sources of water, as I was explaining before, they were used for farming, right, for agricultural purpose. And next to these activities, there is the urban settlement that you can see down there on the left. This kind of allows me to introduce another topic, which will be probably a reason to research a little bit more. And the fact that throughout the territory of Dubai and the desert, every urban every settlements, call it desert settlements, work in the same way. Somehow the urban implant was not even named, right? So we had to recall it as a spin wheel typology, where all the houses are placed around an empty space that eventually should be filled with services to the neighborhood. And usually they only have the mosque, as you can see, isolated right in the middle of the space. And this is interesting because somehow it's the same way how the city was developed. So if you look at the one portion of Jumeirah, for instance, it works exactly the same. The houses were placed in this kind of ring around this empty space in the middle, but then because of the different value of the land and the idea of a different density, they're supposed to take place there, then they were filled with more houses. But the principle is always the same, both in the city and in the desert. In the desert, though, it happened something else. It's kind of an urban pattern, or desert pattern. There are this is in Al Lisaili. Next, it's within that rectangle, and you will see that the pattern here shows, first of all, that the lots are really big, and they are divided by these sikas in between. This is for possibly for to protect from fire and so on. But there is this kind of internal circulation that is not really used. As you can see, sometimes it's well kept, sometimes it's more abandoned, and so on. There is a potential of densification in these areas. And the other characteristics that the lots were very, very big, I learned recently, that because they're supposed to have their own agricultural activities within the lot, and nobody does that, right? So as you can see here, it's been fully paved, and this huge distance between the property wall and the house with this space that is not really used so much. And this also gives an idea of how this could be reused. Of course, these houses are somehow organic, maybe metabolist. They grow throughout time. They're kind of, the family expands, and within the lot, as you can see from this picture, there are lots of small other volumes that are taking place throughout time. But going back to the nature of Margam, again, you see the picture shows something completely different than what you are used to think of the desert. And if you think if this is a kind of utopia, it probably was in the past, but it's a reality, because there was a wish from the sheikh that wanted to actually transform the desert to green. This was a sort of an obsession that I found in the literature of that time. And then the Margam works like this now, right? Like, these are the pictures that you see. And if you think that these are taken in the middle of the desert of Dubai, they definitely look strange. I want to, or unusual more than strange. I want to show a small video about this. Please stop me if you cannot, if there are any problems. So I'll try to make it work better here.
ये सब्जी बाद में मालिक मार्केट में लेके जाएगा।
कौन सा मार्केट?
मार्केट में लुलू है, फिर मार्केट ये बड़ा मार्केट है ना। ये दुबई में आबिर मार्केट, ये फैला जाता है आबिर मार्केट। मालिक को ऑफिस होता है, रूम होता है, उधर से बड़ा मार्केट है ना, वो मार्केट में ऐसा सप्लाई करता है।
हाँ, क्या क्या सब्जियाँ आप डालते हैं?
बहुत है, ये मालूम है, कोरिएंडर, कोरिएंडर, ये जॉर्जिर, लाल सिरा, ग्रीन सिरा नहीं है, एक खत्म हो गया।
और आप कब से यहाँ काम कर रहे हैं? कितने साल हो गए?
हम इसमें 3 साल हो गए।
3 साल। और
आप किधर से?
बंगाली।
आप क्या उधर क्या करते थे?
मेरे को काम करने का, सब्जी अच्छा करने का ये तालीम मेरे, ये काम मेरा।
तो आप इधर भी वही करते हैं ना?
और वो आदमी लोग है ना, वो आदमी लोग सारा पाकिस्तानी, वो आदमी लोग को काम है जरूरत में बीज डालने का, ट्रैक्टर लगाने का काम उसका है। और सब्जी काट करता है। ये बड़ा वाला रूम है ना, इसमें बंडल को काम, सब्जी को ऐसा करके बंडल बनाता है। बाद में गाड़ी आता है, गाड़ी लेके जाता है।
Okay, so that was an explanation of one of the case studies. This is when I unleash my students into the desert, and that's what they bring back. I like the video that shows not only the kind of morphological condition of this settlement, but also what is kind of life is happening there. Now, moving on, we can look at the other examples. For instance, the other phenomenon that is happening is that, as we said before, is the one of the tourism. And there are different kind of approaches, but the major ones are this one here in the area of the Desert Conservation Reserve. There is what I call the Bedouin camp, right? So it's again to provide tourists with a certain experience that they cannot find anywhere else. Then there is this idea of bringing a new iconography of spending time in the desert in certain areas with a certain architecture that reminds of, if you like, a certain also Orientalism. So this is one of the solution, or you can have a different condition. This is Bab al-Shams, is what I call the Arabian fortress. Again, it's a sort of an imaginary Arabian village that goes back to what we think it should look like an Arabian fortress in the desert, although this is recently built. And it kind of brings all the language of spatial experience of that kind of imaginary. There are other functions. There are very specific functions, somehow, sometimes very awkward. These are the sevens, what I call the rugby heterotopia. And heterotopia is a concept by Michel Foucault that I will explain in one moment, in 1 second. But basically, this is a stadium that is designed and mainly used for one event that lasts for, I think, 1 week every year. Of course, this year was not held, but that's what it used to be. And it's right there in the middle of the desert. It's kind of an urban event detached from the city. Obviously, all the people involved in these activities come from the city for that specific event. And it's there mostly because it's much cheaper to build there in the desert, but being a very specific function, it's worth the trip to go there. But that's what it makes philosophically. The heterotopias are concrete physical places in contrast to utopias that are imaginary. So, the idea of the oasis, that it's a difference within the hegemonic state of the desert, that also applies to the sevens. So as you can see here in the definition of the term, the word heterotopia consists of 2 parts derived from the Greek heteros and topos. And Foucault suggests that heterotopia describe places of otherness and of marginality, sites of difference in relation to the hegemonic space of society. that surrounds it. Now, in the 70s, to prove that this is basically only used for that event, except few people that are here, that go in there to bring the teenagers to play rugby like this. But, you know, this is the list of events that the 70s held in the, you know, I was, the 2012, they only had the pedigree pet show, which is not very kind of busy activity. So for most of the time, this place is deserted, but then in that week, it becomes something like this. And it's a quite specific location and urban event, if we want to call it, that is very peculiar to the desert of Dubai. And it's also peculiar in the way how people behave, something that probably they cannot feel so comfortable to engage in the city. Somehow in the desert seems to be in that specific week allowed, almost like what used to be the traditional carnival for the Western societies, you know, when someone will kind of abandon the everyday rules and routine. The best way to represent this is not by architectural drawings, but actually through these infographics that shows the different functions that happen there, and one can understand where the functions are located, how they rotate around the main function, offer, and so on. And so this is a kind of a useful iconography that we can study. Moreover, we can also say that because it's confined to a certain time, as you can see, if you go on the website, it tells you how many days is left to that event. Foucault goes beyond and says that the heterochrony or heterochronia in evolutionary development biology, heterochrony is any genetically controlled difference in the timing or duration of a development process in an organism compared to its ancestors or other organisms. So the heterochronia, basically for Foucault, is an heterotopia confined into a certain moment of time, you know, like for instance, the presence of a circus. He makes the example of a circus that goes to a place and it happens there for 1 week and then moves somewhere else, something that also implies the notion of nomadism. Then it's, these are events, specific functions. Then how is the dwelling? We can see that there are some examples that are only happened very recently that are concerning how to design new housing projects, for instance, in the desert. The valley is what I call the project beyond the urban growth boundary line, because there is a reason why now we're looking at the desert for this kind of projects. If you look at the Dubai average residential prices, the peak of 2008, and now look what's happening. It happened something in 2014 for the idea that the expo would solve all our life, but it's slowly descending and descending. It seems unstoppable, and it's getting worse and worse. So the high-end market is saturated, and now we're looking at what can be in terms of social housing, let's say, or maybe better affordable housing. Social housing is just for a national, of course. So these are the requirements how to sell the different residential typology, all residential apartment and villas. And there is this idea that it's the end of build it and they will come. So the saturation and the oversupply of the residential projects now has finally stopped a little bit, at least slowed down for a bit, but they didn't stop somewhere else, right? Because as I said, the affordable homes are kind of, people, the prices went so low that they start thinking, why are we paying rent? Let's look for some affordable residential project. And one of these is the valley. And it's significant to me among many others because this goes in the desert and it's on the way to Alain. And as you can see, the master plan is very specific to define what is an urban area in yellow and what are the non-urban settlements, as you can see here. And there is also this line here, which is what I say, the urban growth, right? In theory, the line is along the 611 roads, and anything that it's beyond shouldn't be built, basically, because that's not urban settlement. But then if you locate the Valley project, you see that it's way beyond. And so this process that was defined by the Master Plan 2020 is actually already old, right? So something needs to be rediscussed, and we need to understand what are the implications of bringing the city so far from the original condition and the urban context. So the images of the project, of course, has nothing to do with the desert, with the image of the desert. The space, the speciality of the desert is kind of, you know, one of the images that we see very often in many residential developments, and this idea of being able to afford a larger space, better facilities at a lower price, that always been the moving force of the urban sprawl. So there is this conquest of the desert, and many projects will probably come. And that's one of the final questions in this investigation is, what is the sustainable future of peri-urban settlements? Because the peri-urban will be technically something that is adjacent to the city, but as I think I demonstrated, the desert of Dubai is actually the suburbs of the city, right? Something that is there to sustain the city and is intimately connected. Now, last part of my presentation is addressing another question that I had. If the UAE desert urbanity, as I call it, is the same everywhere, you know? Is it the desert of Abu Dhabi or Sharjah or Ras Al Khaimah the same as the Dubai? Does it work with the same principles? Does it have the same characteristics? Well, I went a little bit beyond, and I start to look at also at what happens in Sharjah. I've been many years there working. And again, the phenomenon of the conquest of the desert is also fueled by the need of reconversion of certain areas. People escape from the congestion of the city, and they try to get a better condition by going away from the coast, again, into the desert. So there are different projects now ongoing there. But as you can see, it's basically there is a declaration. This is the manifesto, right? It's the new Sharjah. So we kind of give up. Again, it's a sort of a metabolist approach. You know, the Japanese, we give up on the old city, on the existing city, and we build a new layer. Now, Japanese didn't have space, so we're building the new city on top of the old city with this huge infrastructure of projects. And while in here, we have lots of space, so the city moves away from the old city, and we define the new Sharjah. The new Sharjah that can be designed in a good way somehow, or in a bad way. In common, again, these two master plans, these two projects don't have anything of the local condition of the any vernacular studies or whatever. They might be well studied in terms of response to environment, climate changes, blah, blah, all that. But somehow, you know, a project can be good, can be bad. Probably the one on the left is better than the one on the right. They both put at the center of the new city that are proposing to the inhabitants the commerce of the shopping center. Some of them it's rounded because it's Jadid, so we don't have sharp corners. And then they sell this idea of an area of the city that, as you can see, more than the project itself. You look what happens around, and you know, it seems that there is a plan of going into the desert and really inhabit it heavily. I don't know what's going to happen. I don't think that this green buffer between the highway and the residential units will ever happen. I only know that the center, the shopping mall, is the generator of the space, and that tells a lot about the society. What I see, though, that these are just, as you can see, these are very recent pictures, and the very ugly and very badly designed buildings at the center of Sharjah are being moved to the desert. So there is no kind of reassessment of what the architecture specifically in the desert should require to address the different conditions of the context and the landscape design. But if we do the same exercise, and now I'm going to end my presentation with this, to move that rectangle from Dubai to Sharjah, we see that the functions are slightly different. They're not so much related to the tourism of the city, the vocation of the city, but actually they are related to the vocation of the Emirates. So Sharjah is more somehow more intellectual, you know, like it's considered more the cultural capital of the UAE. And we can see here that the functions kind of match more and more of these ideas. There are more farms, for instance, more local people living there, more services of the Emirates, and not so much tourism as the Dubai intent. But the question and the interesting part is that there are specific moments. For instance, this very peculiar city, which I call the roundabout city. Al Madam is on the way to Hatta, and is connecting to Oman, and is a strong intersection between two major axes. I had another video, but I think I'm running out of time. I'm not going to show it. But as you can see, this is the roundabout city works very specifically by placing all the city along the roads. Beyond the first row of buildings, there is desert. So that's an infrastructural city that is generated by that intersection. And the interesting research is also to find out the functions. I found a seafood restaurant in Al Madam. I didn't eat there, but there are lots of birds shops for some reason, some animal pets shops, maybe to support, as you can see, these are the other urban settlements that the spin wheel that we just discussed. My last comment is that the architecture of the desert of Sharjah then again supports this vision of becoming something special. And it's not really imaginary, but somehow it embraces the contemporaneity of architecture, possibly in a better way, proposing some of the best buildings that have been built in the last years in the UAE. And you can find, like more museums, for instance, or some other facilities, educational facilities, or even the BIA headquarters, some offices are kind of taking the chance of portraying a message of innovation, and also somehow a better sensitivity, more kind of analogically approach to the landscape of the desert with this building that is definitely a very interesting building, and or the reconversion of certain structures like in the Al Faya Lodge designed by an architect that is really through minimalism trying to match the different use of materiality and the design with the surrounding context. This is also generating certain phenomena. I didn't know about this place. I don't know if you had the chance to go through, but just across the road from that building that I just showed, there was this kind of ongoing party, open air with the kind of techno music and all the people enjoying the view toward the surrounding landscape. So it's slightly different, and it's more somehow culturally oriented. There are the Malaya Archaeological Center by the architects is another great building that fits very well with the archaeological context. So there is a difference between the different deserts, and this will be some of the topics of my ongoing research. And I finish here, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Cristiano, for the interesting presentation with a lot of spots on and a lot of interesting questions to come out of this presentation. Maybe I would start with the question of doing this intense research on the different points of and looking for the role of the desert in Dubai. As a specialist in the field, how do you see the future of this research? How do you see the future of the city? Because also talking about these, I would call them magnets, or these places to offer some touristic locations. The only reason for placing them far from the city is to get maybe the feeling of being out of nowhere without any man-made features, and I mean, at least on the horizon of the person staying there. So if we talk about this extent now of extending the city towards that direction, are we ready, especially considering the population of the city of Dubai? And whenever there is a need, we will be looking for solutions, especially when we compare this to Rem Koolhaas and the different or nature of these countries. So don't you think it's a matter of maybe numbers or the growth of the city? It's strongly linked to the need of people to spread horizontally in the city, or in other words, how do you see the future of the city such as Dubai?
You see, during my presentation, I say something I strongly believe that as architects, we never get the future. We always try, we always look at the future, we never get it right. We always make huge mistakes. Just think about the old modernism, the old utopia of providing new typologies that never worked out. That being said, Dubai is a specific place that it's globalized, especially because it, more than other places, that has stronger roots, let's say, and strong autonomy. It goes with the wind, and the wind is the overall global economic condition. That's what is the real engine of the city. So it's in the engine of the more consolidated urban context and its repercussion into the desert. As you can see, the needs for affordable housing that is now going beyond the urban growth line depends on the fact that the land in Dubai is too expensive for affordable housing, and therefore we need to go and grow there. And why is that too expensive? Because there is no return on the investment for high-end anymore, and then so on. And this goes to a very global scale. So I believe that the desert is the new territory of conquest, and I think it's wrong, because one of the major questions and challenges in Dubai will be the issue of densification, that sometimes I see explored in some of the better products coming out of academia in Dubai. Very little, unfortunately, because I don't believe that the academia in Dubai actually is there to solve the problem. Most of the time, to solve the problem. Dubai, your school does a good job. I saw many projects coming in the center, and I'm very happy to see that, and this is very rare. But somehow that will be the right strategy that I will take, to look at the city and try to figure out a sustainable densification, because we already know, history already explained and told us that the urban sprawl is wrong. Commuting from one point to another one is wrong. The traffic of Sharjah is wrong. It makes people living miserable, and so on. All the problems related with public transportation and so on. I think it's happening, and again, it's independent from us. We will be asked to support and provide a design solution when this will be decided by somebody else that will react to the changes of the global scenario. If that answers your question.
Yes, and I think I totally agree on the need of the affordable houses. That may be a very strong force to extend the city. Looking back then in Dubai a few years back, and the expansion towards Abu Dhabi was very clear when there was need to build more in the city. The next question would be, through this study and researching some areas such as Margam, do you see any missed opportunities in these areas or these locations?
Well, I don't know yet, I have to say. I have to be honest, because this is the beginning of my research. My PhD will actually focus exactly on this question, And my last question of my presentation, what is the future? What is the sustainable future of this desert/urban settlements? This is something, if you ask me in 3 years from now, I'll probably have a better answer. For now, I'm starting to look and study, and this analysis takes a lot of time. And we develop an awareness. Before, these places were just mysterious. Now we already know a lot about it, but I need to figure out first the state of art, what happens there, right? And also what is the literature available that I already know is very little, because as I said, everyone focus on the city. And then start to kind of think of maybe even through design studio courses that like I'm doing now, where we are designing this, what we call the extra urban house, like how to design a new typology of a residential villa for the new generation of local Emirati that goes beyond the ambitions of national housing, for instance. So through these kind of case studies and design exercise, then we will be able to put together a new strategy, hopefully, inshallah. Yeah.
Inshallah. Okay. So mentioning Rem Koolhaas and the Western case studies that you of course look at and that we can recognize as a global case studies to take into considerations. When we look at such case studies and when it comes to applying them to a city like Dubai, where do you see the differences and where do you see the points that you can take to consider in Dubai? So what are the main differences between the urban growth in Western areas and the urban growth in the Middle East? Maybe some points that we know and we need to consider as differences, that some points that we can't really consider in this region, and other points that we can take and we learn from to apply in our city.
Well, this was a little bit the explanation of when I presented the difference in the rectangles. Right? Yeah. You take any rectangle there, it can be very casual and they all look the same. While if you move it to somewhere and you just go casually there, you might risk to find an empty space, right, with no function. So that's the huge difference. That's the density is the major difference. And because of the particular condition of an hostile environment that is very difficult to inhabit it, while it's not the same in Europe, back in Europe, right? And I don't know if I agree with Rem Koolhaas reading the research in terms of global. I think it's very European. By studying it deeply, it's really, really European, and that because he applied this idea by traveling to a Swiss village. That's if you have it's very interesting. If you read this article from 2014 about the countryside, is going on vacation, on spending his weekends in this village in Switzerland, and that's where he noticed all these changes because he went there for like 30 years, So the village completely changed, and that's where he started to have that idea. For me, it was the inspiration of, the question was like, so you say this about Europe. So what happens in Dubai? And the difference is exactly what I explained, right? You have to change completely the point of view. The point of research needs to be addressed in a completely different manner, because if we slavishly follow his research and apply to Dubai, we miss out the point completely, actually, the main difference in the end is that the desert side of Dubai is not yet an antagonist to the city, but is still supporting the city, because as we saw, all the functions that don't happen in the city happens in the desert, and that's somehow, an area that is there. It's the playground of Dubai, let's say, the desert. So it's supporting it. But I think that it's going to become more and more an antagonist in its own specific manner. So there is a strong difference between what happens on the countryside and the desert side, between Europe and the UAE.
We have one more question, Cristiana. Would you consider the fact that the countryside already had its own identity, structure, architecture with the natural environment?
Well, it's a tricky question, because somehow, for sure, vernacular architecture everywhere in the world now responded in a specific manner for specific contexts and specific needs. So I see also that the vernacular architecture responded very specifically to the desert condition of the UAE, okay, which might be a different desert than Israel or China or whatever, right? It will be different. But then, as I show in the presentation, the same urban typology of settlements that has been used in Jumeirah is being just moved into the desert without any critical change. And and again, when I asked the authorities, that's very interesting. Why do you do that? How do you call this? That was my question. What is there a name? I was expecting some impossible to understand Arab terminology, right? And they said, we don't know. So that's why we came up with this spin wheel, aggregation of things, because we don't know that nobody knows. So I think that again, the desert is a source for lots of investigation and a more appropriate design response. See, both in terms of its urbanity, spatial urbanity, and its architectural and spatial condition and solutions.
All right, I think that's all for the questions, and I'm personally looking forward to the outcome of the research, and then I'll maybe hopefully meeting you in 3 years' time and asking you some few questions that you may have more of these answers. Interesting research, interesting presentation to clearly show the point of the research and the investigation of the different areas in Dubai and in the country in general. So I thank you, Cristiano, for your time, and thank you for coming, and thank you for this talk and for the presentation. Thank you, George, also for the organizing. Thanks for everyone who joined in today, and I hope you enjoyed as we did this talk. Thank you, everyone, and thank you, Cristiano, again, and have a good day. See you all.
You too. You too. Bye. Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you.